Okay, thanks, Joe. Well, as I said, I was in Sydney last week, and that's actually where I filmed from, or north of Sydney, actually, in a country town called Gloucester last week. Then I travelled down to Sydney to head home and was caught up in the floods and the pilot problems and the airport problems. And so I got to stay an extra couple of days and enjoyed a trip around Sydney. And Sydney's very well known for this particular building, the Opera House. But what was it? It was established after a competition for what? I wonder if people know. Well, it was established after a competition for design. In fact, the guy that won the competition, Jorn Utzon, is now famous in Australia because of that design. It was built in 1959. It's made out of prefabricated concrete shells, I guess you'd call them, which is really interesting. They're not real shells, but they're obviously called design. But real shells in this world are not regarded as designs. They're randomly created, randomly derived objects, it seems, in science. Here's a Sydney Opera House that we have on display in our museum. There's actually two there. I wonder if you can tell which one had intelligence applied to it. So the one on the right has got exactly the same pieces as the one on the left. Now, what's the difference? Is it time the difference? Is it random chance? That's the difference. Or is it intelligence and skill? That's the difference. Well, during our visit to Sydney, we went to the Australian Museum. And here we have a few of my kids standing in front of a giant T-Rex model. And it was quite gruesome. It had all its insides opened and all sorts of things like that. But have a close look at what was involved. There were 17 professionals involved, over 10,000 person hours, 5.5 months, and all those materials there put together to make that model. And look closely at it. See on its shoulder there? There's a whole bunch of hair-looking things, which is actually meant to be the start of feathers. Yes, the museum's telling us that dinosaurs, in fact, including T-Rex, started to produce or evolve feathers. And this is the start of feathers. And this is incredible. We shouldn't be surprised because National Geographic were the ones that put this model together, and that's what they want us to believe. There's lots of little kids running. In fact, it was packed because of the bad weather and it's school holidays here. It was packed with children and families all reading that dinosaurs have evolved over millions of years and that T-Rex and other dinosaurs were the first to evolve feathers. And there's some displays there with dinosaurs with feathers on them as well. Well, did T-Rex really evolve feathers? You might remember from our discussion last week this quote from Moshek from the University of Indiana. He said, the first eye, the first wing, the first placenta, I think we could throw in the first feather there, how they emerge. Explaining these is the foundational motivation of evolutionary biology, and yet we still do not have a good answer. The classic idea of gradual change, one happy accident at a time, has so far fallen flat. Well, the Australian Museum doesn't think it's fallen flat. They're out there telling all these school children that feathers evolved on dinosaurs from dinosaur scales, presumably. I can't imagine anyone thinking that a modern-day crocodile, given enough time, would eventually evolve feathers and start flying around the place. Here's something I think is a little bit more scientific, maybe a rule that we could one day establish in science, that complex organs cannot form gradually over time, and feathers are complex, but they need to be fully functional within one generation for an organism to either survive or perhaps under an evolutionary understanding, or to pass it on to their offspring as a selected advantage. So can feathers fit into that as complex organs? Well, look what this was in the museum. In the bird section, there's a wing of a bird, and it talks about how the arrangement of the feathers, not just the feather themselves, there's a whole bunch of feathers in a wing that are required to help a bird fly, and it's their arrangement as well as the actual design of the feathers that are essential for a bird to fly. Can this evolve gradually? Well, also at the museum in the foyer, when you first walk in, it's nearly as complex as our Sydney Opera House Lego construction, perhaps. Well, it was enormous, really. This is not a pixelated picture. That's actually a Lego dinosaur. It's been put together, and there was a whole exhibition on that by a guy called the Brick Man, and you had to pay extra to go into that, so I didn't do that, but you could see some of these in the foyer as well. It took a lot of intelligence, not only to put the bricks together, but even to build the bricks. It took a lot of intelligence, takes a lot of intelligence to build those dinosaurs. And yet they say that T-Rex has evolved and birds evolved, but look what they call it, the exhibition themselves. They call them brick creations. They can't get away from using that term. It's quite incredible. And yet these dinosaurs, imagine that walking around. There's my son there standing in front of a large dinosaur, and those creatures are supposedly random chance developments rather than creations. Remember our Lego Opera House? Which one had intelligence applied to it? Indeed, the instructions for the Opera House is called Creator, and you need to be an expert, apparently, to put it together. Intelligence and skill is the difference, not random chance. Look at a living cell. There's a microscope slide using cryo-electron microscopy of just part of a cell. It's incredibly complex. Does that look like random chance to you? Well, we also visited the Australian National Maritime Museum. I hadn't been there before, and it was actually very well put together. There's a big plesiosaur with my children standing in front of it. It was a great museum, had lots of good stuff in it. But there was this sign there, all about how reptiles evolved in the water, because it's a maritime museum, from land reptiles and all the things they need to survive in water. And they say here, marine reptiles evolved from land-based reptiles. They had to change to survive in a very different environment. They had to be able to move through the water, breathe, find food, avoid predators, and reproduce without returning to land. They changed, see that word there? Gradually, generation by generation. Well, think about it. Is it really possible to evolve gradually all of those requirements for life? And in the pictures there listed all of these things they needed to evolve gradually to survive in water. They need to learn to swim. They need to learn to stay the right way up in water. They need to learn how to reproduce in water. They need to learn how to avoid predators, how to eat, how to slip through the water, how to deal with all the salt, how to stay warm, how to breathe in water, and how not to sink or float. So all of these things a creature that's evolving in the water has to have to survive, yet they say it's got to be gradual. How is this possible? It's ridiculous. Remember our new rule? I think this should be a new scientific rule. Complex organs or features or functions within an organism cannot form gradually over time. They need to be fully functional within one generation for that organism to survive. And I thought I'd just slip this photo in. This is a photo of the forest I worked in Gloucester, a rainforest up there, just to show some of you in other parts of the world some of the beautiful forests we've got here. And I look at that. I don't see gradual change over time, evolving all of these things. I see magnificent design and beauty that we can enjoy and study and praise God for.